Well, welcome everyone. We're so thrilled to have you joining us. We're just going to give a couple of seconds, see a lot of folks in the waiting room that are now joining the chat. So yeah, excited to have you joining this conversation. We'll go ahead and get started in a couple minutes. In the meantime, if you are just joining, want to flag, we have a couple other education sessions coming up. So if you're on the public procurement side, we have a monthly series that we're kicking off with some training every month. And then we also have an education series for public procurement professionals and suppliers as well on myth busting, buying and selling off of state and local contracts. So that'll be on Halloween, spooky. If you're free to join us, please do so. And I think with that, we're going to jump right in. So like I said, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today for this really exciting conversation. As you all know, we'll be digging into quantifying the costs of the RFP and bid process today and introducing some really groundbreaking work. So I'm really honored to have several procurement leaders here with us today, and we'll introduce them and discuss their experience contributing to this project a little bit later. I'm Marielle Reed. I'm CEO and founder of Pavilion, and I started Pavilion really inspired and equally frustrated from my time in the city and county of San Francisco. And for those of you that aren't familiar, today Pavilion is the leading platform for entities to find and buy from suppliers with cooperative contracts. And to introduce today's topic, I'll share last year I had the honor of being part of a conversation that was kicked off by the NIGP Business Council at NIGP Forum that brought together both business and public procurement, private sector business and public procurement leaders, specifically around the cost to procure and the cost to propose. And I'm really grateful to Tammy Rimes and NCPP, who launched a much broader initiative over the last year to really track in greater detail the costs of procurement across public entities and drive the creation for the first time ever of a national baseline around those costs through what's called the RFP Tracking Project. So Tammy, kicking it over to you. Let's hear from you and about you and NCPP and the project.
Thanks so much, Marielle. Welcome, everyone. I'm Tammy Rimes, the Executive Director for the National Cooperative Procurement Partners. It's actually an association very similar to NIGP or CAPO or FAPO or any of the other state associations, except we're very specific in our mission and focus. We focus on that part of the procurement pie called cooperative procurement. So we produce a lot of educational content. And I have to tell you, I do a lot of speaking and training across conferences in the US and Canada. And a question always gets asked, and it could be the supplier side or it could be the procurement side. How much does it cost to conduct your own solicitation process? And to be honest, I didn't have an answer. And so this went on for years. And finally, we've gotten to the bottom of it through this report and presentation today. So I appreciate you all being here to hear some of the efforts and some of the people who participated into this project.
Thanks, Tammy. Okay, so on briefly to today's agenda. So first, Tammy's going to be diving into quantifying the cost of running a solicitation. So the RFP tracking project and some of the key takeaways across all entities that participated. And then our panelists will speak to how they tracked their costs and participated in the project, and also how they're going to be using this information or already are using this information at each of their entities. And then finally, I'm going to show you how you can estimate and track procurement costs too, even if you haven't tracked them for your specific agency yet, using our new cost to procure calculator. So Pavilion is launching this calculator today, and I'm excited to take you all through it. Just some administrative logistical information before we dig into the report. First off, I've already gotten some questions about will the session be recorded? Yes, it's being recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording and the presentation slides with you after the webinar. While we haven't turned on group chat, we are monitoring the questions. So if you have any questions during the course of the conversation today, please go ahead and drop them into Zoom, and our team will be monitoring that and trying to get them to our panelists for discussion during the conversation or at the very end of the webinar. And then finally, if you're joining us from the public procurement community and you're pursuing certification, we have confirmed that this session will count for 1 hour towards your UPPCC CPPO or CPPB certification. So with that, we did want to introduce a bit of participation here at the very beginning. So we'd love to get a sense with a quick poll of what your organizations have already done to measure your solicitation or bid costs. And we know some of you are joining from the supplier side. So if you're a supplier, has your company looked into how much it costs you as a business to respond to an RFP or bid? And of course, if you're in public procurement, has your team analyzed internal costs of running a new solicitation at some degree or level? So I'm going to give folks maybe 30 seconds to go ahead, not too complicated, not too many options here, but just to get a sense of who is joining us in the room. So we'll go ahead and let you click your response and then close it out in a couple more seconds. All right. See a lot of results coming in. I think we can close it out in maybe 5 more seconds. All right, let's close it out. So not surprisingly, looks like majority of folks have said no or maybe, I have no idea, which is totally fair. And actually more than I anticipated have some notion of costs, with about 19% of respondents saying, yes, we've done something to kind of measure, have a ballpark range for how much it costs our organization to propose or procure. So I wanted to just share, an experience that's relevant, I think, from the from private sector, the technology industry, about how paying attention to costs can help change behavior. So this is an example from Shopify that I've shared, I know, with some of you, because when I came across it, I felt really excited. Shopify basically added a calculator to the company's calendar app that showed everyone in the company, whenever they booked a meeting, just how much that meeting would cost in administrative time. And so it used the average compensation data of different roles and departments, attending that particular meeting, to ballpark quantify the cost of a meeting in terms of staff time. And the average cost of a 30-minute meeting with just 3 employees was between $700 and $1,600. And if there was just one exec in the meeting, 30 minutes was more than $2,000. So again, the goal here was really to get the company to think more strategically about how they were using one of our most finite resources, time, and it was quite effective. So Shopify was actually able to reduce meeting times, the amount of time spent in meetings by their team, 14% just by having this reminder in place. So again, I offer this as an interesting starting point as we launch into how we're doing some of this work to quantify the costs and the value of time, and how we think about procurement costs overall, because we all know procurement teams are generally understaffed, overworked. So when we're thoughtful about how we spend limited staff hours, we can really stretch those taxpayer dollars and make sure our teams are delivering more impact for those hours work. And that's rewarding for team members too. So I think we're all looking to make sure that the limited time we have is focused on what feel like the most important things. And again, at the end of the day, our goal as public procurement, members, is to deliver impact to our communities and create a better customer experience for departments and suppliers. So this is just a preview of knowing how much it costs to going out to bid or solicit can help us make sure we're working on things that achieve those goals. Here's some of the ways that we can use that data. We can use it to assess if we should run a solicitation or use maybe a cooperative contract or alternative pathway. We can prioritize which purchases we want to put out to bid. And then we can also show our team's impact on the bottom line. Justify a particular decision and the overall kind of efficiency and strategic function of the team as well. Of course, administrative costs are just one of many considerations that factor into if you go to bid or use a cooperative contract. So there are a bunch of other inputs here. We know funding requirements, politics, the availability of an alternative path or cooperative contract, and many other considerations. But again, for the first time ever, it's now something that we can more easily track and help guide, use as an input to guide our decision making. So now if you're a supplier, there's also a cost for you to do business with the government. And the NIGP Business Council released a white paper on the top reasons that suppliers choose not to respond to bids. And one of those is cost. So last year, the members of the Business Council quantified this cost to private industry and found that among that group, it costs between $6,000 and $30,000 in staff time to respond as a business to a bid or an RFP. So again, we're excited to have suppliers participating in this dialogue as well, since time is money on both sides. So with this, I'll hand it over to you, Tammy, and we're looking forward to hearing you share more about the RFP Tracking Project.
So this actually came out of last August at the NIGP annual event, and we were there giving a presentation and actually had a cooperative track. And throughout that, I got that question: how much does it cost to go out to bid versus how much does it cost to go the cooperative route? And it really kind of stuck in my head. And I thought somebody needs to do something about this. So the National Cooperative Procurement Partners, also known as NCPP, is an association that actually has a 360 membership. I was a former purchasing agent myself for the city of San Diego, and it was very important to me that we do always focus our content toward the procurement and government community. But we include cooperative organizations in our membership, suppliers who have awarded cooperative contracts, and then over 19,000 government employees. And education is a huge part of our mission. So when we decided to tackle this issue, it was very cumbersome, because let's just think of it. You know, the salary rates in Montana are going to be very different than the salary rates in New York. And then you've got the rules of California versus the rules of procurement for Florida. So how do we tackle this animal? So what we decided to do was to actually first create a master spreadsheet with all of the steps that are combined within any kind of procurement process. Because a lot of us, even though we're at different parts of the country, or one works for a city, one works for an airport, another works for higher ed, we still follow common best practices when we go through procurement. So in creating that spreadsheet, we tried to think of every single step you could possibly go through. And then we looked at the roles involved, not only in procurement, but we also needed to look at the other roles: your assigned counsel, your management team, your risk management, subject matter experts, the evaluation team. And so we went out and researched salary ranges for each of those specific those roles to come up with a standard so that we truly could do apples to apples comparison. Next slide, please. So when we got out there, then once we created all the data, all of the background, then we decided, let's go out and invite participants. And you're going to hear from some of them today. One of the questions we ask is, when you have an upcoming bid or RFP project, can you please track every half-hour increment on that project? Whoever's involved, from start to contract award, even if you have to take it before a city council or board, we want to track that time, because that really is the comprehensive full assessment of what it truly costs, not just procurement's cost, everybody's cost. And in the end, you as a procurement professional, and back when I was in the job, it would have been nice to know this number, because if it costs a certain dollar amount to go out to bid and the product is less than that amount, why the heck am I going out to bid? I just spent double and triple for that product. So that's what we'll hope. What we're sharing today will help you in that process. Now, you as procurement folks are in the driver's seat. I had my own politics. I had my own operational concerns. I had huge media oversight on my city. And so I was always cognitive that I have to be as transparent, above board. Everyone can clearly see why I chose one decision over the other. So cooperative procurement and contracting is a tool, one tool that you can use to help streamline. But sometimes we have to go out to bid for operational reasons, for political reasons. And often we're asked by the suppliers, why are you going out to bid on this? You can just piggyback on this contract, but we can't really share with the suppliers what's going on behind the curtain back in our organization. We have to go out to bid. So if you have to go out to bid, let's talk about that. Next slide, please. So part of it was just to quantify the personnel expenses, but we also looked at other expenses and were allowed all the participants. So if you had copying expenses, if you had advertising expenses, any true dollar cost. In the end, we had 70 volunteer at the beginning of the project, but you know what happens, life happens. Things happen. The budget runs out. We now have a new priority and they've canceled that project. The person who agreed to track the project, they just retired and they didn't turn it over to somebody else to track. So we did have several drop out, but in the end, we had 39 public entities who collected their data between the months of August 2 to 2023, when we started it at NIGP, till March 2024. You can download the full report with all of the data, with all of the salaries that we used, all of that to get the full report. But we also have a dashboard that we've offered just to sum up the results, which I'm going to cover now in the next few slides. So what does it take to run a solicitation? I told you about us creating that spreadsheet with all of the steps. Well, we really looked at three main categories. Solicitation development, that's when you're pulling together the scope of work, you're meeting with your subject matter experts, you may be doing some industry research, you're creating that bid package to put it out on the street. That moves us to the solicitation response. You have the bid advertisement. You may have questions and answers. You have to issue addendums. Now you're having meetings. You may have a response period that you're in a part of, and you may have to change things up. This is where some of them actually dropped out. They canceled their solicitation at this point. Then for those who got past that point, you have all those proposals coming in. Now you have to open those, you have to evaluate, and then the final negotiation and award. And for some folks, because of the dollar amount, because it was construction or it was a complex project, then they had to bring it before their council or board. So I show you down below some of the potential delays that happened from the start to finish of this project, but these were the three main parts of that process that we were measuring and tracking costs. Next slide. So here's what it takes. That the first process that I just showed you, the solicitation and gathering, that's the most expensive, time-consuming, resource-grabbing part of the process. So if you're wondering through your whole bid process, what's going to take the most of that time, and I think intrinsically we know this, it's the development of the scope of work, development of the specifications. And I've been there with you. I know sometimes we have to rely on our departments, our fleet director, our public works department, the facilities folks to give us the specs. What do you want me to buy? You got to tell me what you want and kind of narrow it down. And if you're like my customer departments, sometimes they would just tear a page out from some vendor manufacturing book and say, here's my specs. And it's like, wait a minute, I can't put that on the street. Only that supplier can now apply. So we have to do a lot of cleanup. We have to do a lot of research back and forth. It's not a clean process. So overwhelmingly, that first part of the process, the initial stages, is the biggest part of your hours. Next, we looked at the projects that were submitted and kind of put them into two groups. Non-complex, commodities, straightforward services, low dollar volume, and we analyzed those. Then we looked at complex, projects over $1 million, construction, maybe it's a commodity combined with installation services. So that makes it a little bit more complex, or it's kind of an open-ended project, like a planning document. So we split it up. And what we found is that if it is a complex project, your highest resource grab is going to be your customer departments, your subject matter experts, your evaluation team. If it's a non-complex project, that simple commodities purchase, it's all on procurement. Our hours are the most. And you would think the converse would be true, but it's really procurement who handles non-complex. That's the stuff we churn out every week, all week long, is what procurement's handling. So now you're wondering how much does it cost? So next slide, please. So when we looked at the salary ranges, here's what we broke it into, and we actually combined other roles. So for instance, procurement manager, that could have been, they could be called a purchasing agent. They could be called something else. So we put all of the different names or nomenclature that role could be called and said, we're calling it procurement manager. Procurement lead, it could be a buyer 1, a buyer 2, a procurement specialist, but that's the procurement lead and all the way down. And what we found is for non-complex, now these are averages. So some of the spreadsheets were a little lower than this, some of them were higher than this, but on average for non-complex, all of the roles combined, most of those didn't have to go through management or even assigned counsel review because they're non-complex, was $1,682 on average. For the more complex project, it did bump up quite a bit, and we got to $17,419. Now, some were much, much higher and some were lower. And I will tell you, when we were averaging this out, we wanted to make sure this was a clean project. So we contracted with academia and had the University of Georgia doctorate program actually review all of the spreadsheets and come up with these cost figures. So it's kind of an independent source that has created that. And what we found that we actually had to throw a couple of spreadsheets out. We did throw the one that was very, very low, had hardly any hours because it was a rebid project, and it really kind of threw all the numbers off. And then we threw out one that was very, very high, that was in the hundreds of thousands of hours, just because it was just such a complex project. It really teetered the numbers one way or the other. So we really did do a little bit of cleanup because we wanted really strong numbers that we could defend. So in looking in this, the conversation can be had within your own team. So if we are going out to buy let's say a $20,000 piece of equipment, and it's got installation and delivery, and maybe it's a little bit more complex, it's going to cost us on average $17,000 to go out and buy this $20,000 piece of equipment. That's where procurement can start getting strategic and think, where do I want to spend my time? I only have so many resources. How are we going to start planning ahead for expiring contracts or new stuff that needs to be purchased? Next slide, please. So 3 conclusions came out of this report, and what we really want you to consider. When do you turn to a cooperative procurement for your purchase? Well, estimating the cost to procure. I just gave you a prime example of if the item you're going to purchase is less than, equal to, or just slightly above the cost to go out to bid, that might help your decision. We're not going out to bid. It makes no sense. Also, streamlining your procurement process. I just shared with you that developing specifications and scope of work is the most time-consuming step for everybody. Every single spreadsheet that came in, this was the most time consuming. So in your own operations, maybe this is something you can look at and find better ways to do it. Or why is it taking us so long? Maybe there's things that we can do to help streamline that with our customer departments. And then finally, a third takeaway that was kind of outside the scope a little bit, but I just thought it was interesting enough to put as part of the conclusions. Folks that recorded advertising, and I tell you, most of them didn't, but about a third did. And it ranged from $70 all the way up to $1,200 was the highest one I saw, $1,200 to advertise for that one bid opportunity. If you are still advertising old school in the newspaper, it's time to do something different. And some of you have it in your rules and policies that you must do it. But maybe this is something you can start tracking over the next year and bring to your management team and say, do you realize we're spending this much money on advertising? Is there any way we can change that policy? Or could I now take that money and purchase that e-procurement system I've been asking for years? So there's just some food for thought for you as well. So I want to get into our participants because they're the ones that actually did a lot of this work for us. So next slide, please. So We have three folks who are with us today, and I have to thank all three of them because they hung in till the end of this project. And I told you that 70 people volunteered, but 39 actually got to the finish line. And I'm going to go through each one of these folks. And so Alejandro Torrado, I'm going to start with you. And the next slide will show one of your projects that you tracked. And Alejandro is the Director of Purchasing for the City of Providence, Rhode Island. And in this case, he had a non-complex project, and it was for translation services. And the total hours for this project was 32 hours with 1,413 in the cost. So it's a little bit lower on the scale. So Alejandro, I have a few questions for you on your project. So when you track this project, were there any issues throughout the process? And is this something that had to involve management review or approval?
Thank you, Tammy, and thanks everyone. I think the main issue was in the city of Providence, like in any other city, we have very limited capacity. And then we had this idea, we found that every department were using like separate contracts. And at some point we thought it would be with separate vendors. So why don't we just go out for bids or for like having a larger contract that allows for multiple vendors to participate. And so that was the first step. But then the second step is who's gonna be responsible for it. And as we know, there's limited capacity. So I ended up doing the whole development, the solicitation, even though I'm not an expert on translation services and interpretation services. So that was perhaps one of the challenges because I'm not an expert. I had to rely on examples, other solicitations. I have to make phone calls. Then when we put the solicitation out, we got multiple questions from multiple vendors. That was again challenging because some of the questions were not easy answers. And I was basically leading the project at the same time. So I was wearing multiple hats for this particular project. So that was perhaps the most challenging part for this project.
Sounds like a typical day in the life of a procurement person.
Exactly.
So tell me, Alejandro, tell me about your organization. So how long have you worked there and how many people on your procurement team?
Right. So I've been in this position for 4 years. I started basically 2 weeks before the pandemic. That was a learning curve. And then right now we have a full team. It's basically everybody is new except for me. We have there are 3 more people besides me working in the procurement department for the city of Providence.
Wow, that's lean and mean right there. Good for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this particular project, because I actually went through each spreadsheet, and I'm looking at it through the lens of a former purchasing director. So one of the things that I found on your spreadsheet for this, that you had no subject matter expert hours, and now you just explained you had to become the subject matter expert. You were it. So all of those hours went into the procurement side of the house.
Exactly. Yes, that is what happened here. Yeah, I became the subject matter expert just by accident, I guess.
And so
a good learning curve, though.
Oh yeah. So for this particular contract, and you may not have it off the top of your head, was this a one-time thing, or was this for a contract that's going to stay in place for a number of years? I mean, is this good for the next 3 years, or was this one for specific translation services we need now?
It's going to be good for the next 3 years. Yeah.
Okay.
We put a lot of effort, but it's a long-term contract, relatively long-term contract.
Okay, perfect. And then when you have so let's say 3 years from now, it's coming up for, or you have other expiring contracts. How do you make the decision about choosing which route you're going to go? Either we're going to go out to bid, or we're going to try to piggyback on the state contract or a cooperative contract. How do you and your team make that decision?
That's a great question. And I think there's a lot of multiple variables. It depends on each contract. For this one, I think we can perhaps prepare a new solicitation. We put some option to extend it, so that will help us. But overall, it depends. It depends if it's a new service, and let's say right now in the city, there's a lot of people are more interested in bringing local vendors. And when there is an opportunity for a small local vendor that is not in a cooperative, we have to go out for bids. But when there is always an opportunity to piggyback a contract, we rely on the state. We use the master price agreement. And right now, there is actually something, I guess, positive in Rhode Island. The law changed. We were restricted to go with certain cooperatives only. Right now, it's more relaxed. We can go with any cooperative within the United States. So I think that is going to change the landscape for us when it comes to, contracting and finding opportunities for vendors.
Great news. That's great news, because we need tools in procurement. And so thank you, Alejandro. So on to our next participant. So we had Howard County, and Howard County actually put in 3 projects, but we're highlighting 2 here today. And we have Robert Bruce. He's the Director of Procurement and Materials Management with the Howard County Public School System. And so, Robert, you submitted 3 spreadsheets, and I appreciate that. Why did you even participate in this? What was kind of the oomph to get you and your team to participate?
Sure, thanks, Tammy. The important reason why we wanted to participate is when I started with the school system, I report to a board of education that approves all of our contracts, and they were hesitant to approve cooperative agreements because they really didn't understand how they worked and how they were procured. So they were anti-cooperative agreements. So I was excited to participate because of the fact that question was always being asked: how much does it cost to do a solicitation? And especially in school systems, when you have limited resources or cuts in staff, cuts in budgets, being able to answer that question with how much it would cost to do a solicitation really helps us when we present items to the board for approval and how we made the determination and how to get there.
So we actually are highlighting 2 of your contracts. One was considered non-complex, student photography services for 47.5 hours for a cost a little over $1,700. But the communications plan was considered more complex, 296 hours with a cost of just shy of $13,000 in cost. So was there anything surprising for your team when you were tracking the personnel costs through these projects? And did you find any particular sections or steps that were difficult?
Sure. We always assume the procurement side. We know the procurement side and how much time our staff take, but it was interesting looking at from the other lens of the staff that are end users that we work with, whether it be the programs that are developing the scope of work or with our general counsel's office. So it was interesting when we started putting a pen to paper with the amount of time people were really involved in that process, and along with the evaluation process as well. So it was an eye-opener to actually put pen to paper to see the amount of time that it actually takes to do some of these procurements, especially when, for example, I have five procurement specialists, and we do about 350 solicitations a year, large procurements.
Wow.
So when you think about the time you spend, we all know that our procurement office is always busy, but it just compounds the issue when it also involves other staff. And again, it helps us answer questions about how much resources these solicitations really do take for a system.
Yeah, that's great. That is eye-opening. So on your projects in particular, again, I looked at all the spreadsheets, and you weren't unique in this, but I'm asking you the question. There were very little admin expenses for either one of these projects. Is that because your procurement team does all your admin work yourself? And when I'm talking admin, clerical, filing, typing, all of that sort, you had very little hours in that category. Can you explain why?
Sure. Yes, we have a really flat hierarchy. So my procurement staff are the ones that are developing with the programs, the solicitations, building the templates, combining the documents, sending them out for vendor signatures, and they're handling that process from A to Z.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point to make to your management team, or when people are asking, and sort of like, I only have this many hours in the day. Do you want me doing something more strategic, or and typing is important, but is that where you want me to spend my time? So I think that is an important point, or also another conclusion that came out of this report. And Robert, thanks to you and team, you really went for it and did 3 of them for us. And then my next one, Chip. Talk about gold stars. For anybody out there who thought you didn't have enough time to track projects, the Greater Rockford Airport Authority in Illinois tracked 5 projects and submitted them. So thank you, Chip, to you and your team. This is Chip Geiger. He's the Procurement and Compliance Manager for the Greater Rockford Airport Authority, which is located in Illinois. So your 2 projects that I brought out, they were non-complex. Breathing apparatus was 24.5 hours at a cost of about a little over $1,100. And then the real low one was an engineering consultant for 7 hours and $320 in cost. So during this, we had several entities, as I mentioned, drop out for various reasons. However, your entity rose to the challenge by tracking several projects. Can you share, obviously you incorporated this within your process. How did you incorporate this in your workload to be able to complete and submit more than one project? Because we have people who are listening in thinking, I might want to track a project now. So what are some tips and tricks for them to be able to do that?
Thank you, Tammy. I have the advantage of being the procurement department for the Greater Rockford Airport. So we run a very lean operation. We are very empowered with what we can do here. So in looking at the cost to sort out, it's one of those things that's always in the back of your mind, but the only difference we did this time is we put it on paper. So we were able to document what that time was, from developing the questions for the scope of work, hitting with the subject matter experts and getting those scopes of work developed, and asking the questions of them, because they're the experts, but they don't like to talk a lot. So we have to draw the answers out of them and get that. We are able to, we have outsourced legal counsel and engineering. Our legal counsel, we have been able to prove to them that we know what we're doing. I've been doing supply chain operations for a couple of years now, so into my 50th year of doing this. But they have trusted us. They have provided us with templates that we use for our bids and for contracts. So I am able to fill in the information of those templates. We use the bid documents in our contracts, so all the information is right there. Then it's a matter of coming back, evaluating what the responses are, and then writing a 2-sentence resolution for our executive board, which generally takes about 30 seconds to have approval on that. Occasionally we will get some
I can
questions.
only dream of a place like that.
We have proven our competence to them.
Yes,
So
and sometimes that is, you have a good track record and you have to build those relationships and trust. So that it definitely came out, because when I was reviewing your spreadsheets, I actually started looking at them and go, wait a minute. He's at the lower end of the scale, and I see no recorded hours for legal counsel or management. And you had good reasons for that. I actually reached out to you and said, hey, did you forget this part? Where are the hours? And you commented, if you want to answer that, why you don't have legal counsel and management.
we do a lot of the work up front. So as I came in here, I worked a lot with legal counsel there. They don't look at my bids before they go out, because I'm using the document that they have provided to me. I fill in the scope of work, I send it out. Legal counsel does not need to look at that. So, through anything with engineering, that has come through our engineering consultants. They have prepared that all. So basically, I take that template, I copy it over into the scope of work and send it out. So it's a matter of using templates. It's a matter of being empowered to do the tasks that we need to do, and then showing your competence that we do
Right.
know what we're doing and proving it every day to those people that need the approvals.
That's awesome, Chip. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And that is food for thought for some of you that's constantly having to go back to your council. Maybe this is part of being proactive and say, hey, let's sit down together and get my template straight so I don't have to keep bothering you all the time. We did have a question come in that I would glance quickly at the questions and answers. There was a question on salaries. And so this is very specific for this project. What we decided to do is not include the fully loaded benefit package, because when you go state to state, agency to agency, everybody has a different pension, everybody has different health benefits, and that just got unwieldy. So we stuck with a stripped down version of just salaries. But what that tells you is if we use fully loaded, and if you use fully loaded salaries in your own tracking, those costs would go much, much higher. So these are the costs that we are sharing today are actually on the lower end because we did strip down salaries. Mario, was there any other questions before we leave this section?
I think that was most of it. I know Rick chimed in and said, you know, the advertising costs definitely are a pain point there, but can be pretty challenging to dismantle because of lobbyists.
Well, I get it. Yes, I get it. The newspapers have power. And obviously, when you're having to go to a political body to stop advertising with newspapers that help promote them during election years. I had that own situation myself in my own city where I didn't want to pay for advertising, but it was a losing battle for me because my mayor and council wanted to keep the local newspapers happy. So but at least you could finally come up with some cost associated with that and say, look, if you're going to continue to have budget situations, here's an area we could possibly cut. Next slide, please. And I think I'm turning it back to Marielle.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tammy, Alejandro, Robert, and Chip. Great to walk through a couple of these examples. And, you know, I think we've covered at a high level how folks have been quantifying procurement costs and why it's important. And as Tammy mentioned, you know, purchasing through a cooperative contract or piggybacking on an available contract can help reduce some of these costs. And again, that's really where Pavilion comes in. So if you're a public procurement professional looking for you know, a supplier who's available on a cooperative contract, we have built the largest repository of contracts from cooperatives, from states, and also from local entities. So Alejandro touched on that as well. Sometimes, you know, if you're looking for a local service, et cetera, it might actually be in your neighbor's filing cabinet or a locally awarded contract too. We're a free resource for you to get in touch with those suppliers as well, so you can make a compliant purchase faster. And our team can also work to support you for free to run trainings for your teams and departments to integrate Pavilion into your intranet pages or other workflows. I know Alejandro recently added a little search bar to the City of Providence's site, which has been fun to see. And then customize your experience for your entity as well at no cost. And as you saw, we also have more trainings coming up on October 3rd and October 31st as well. And then if you're a supplier, it is free to be listed on Pavilion. It's also free to receive business. And we do have some paid features and services as well that can help you increase your visibility, sell more through your existing contracts too. So if you want to learn more about how we can help serve you on either side, send me an email. And I'm so excited because as someone building kind of this technical infrastructure for collaboration, you know, creating the technology to calculate these costs is not the complicated thing. It's the work that Tammy and Robert and Chip and Alejandro have done over the last year and the almost, you know, 40 or so agencies that participated so far to create a standardized methodology and put actual data behind it around staff time. That really is the underlying thing that has been missing for so long. So when I came across this project, I was so excited to get a chance to kind of build this calculator and just tremendously grateful to the agencies and to Tammy for again, establishing a place to start as we think about these costs. So without further ado, I want to share our new cost to procure calculator that Pavilion has built in conjunction with NCPP that helps you leverage this national baseline data for some of your upcoming projects. So we basically developed this calculator to help you compare the cost of running a new bid or RFP against going down the purchasing off of a cooperative contract path. And it builds in methodology and baseline cost data from the RFP Tracking Project. So you can think of it a little bit like a Zillow or a Redfin. If you've ever, if you're like me, late night, you're scrolling through all of this real estate and dreaming about where you might live in the country. The same way, it's not a guarantee of the value of a house. It's just an estimate. Similarly, this cost to procure calculator is certainly no guarantee of cost savings or actual cost that you will spend, but it does provide an estimate. And it's likely, as many have already called out, more conservative because it only considers staff salary costs and not the fully loaded costs of an employee's time, including benefits. Now, again, Alejandro, Robert, Chip, they manually collected information in a large spreadsheet, but this calculator makes it so that you just need to input a few basic parameters around your purchase to get your cost estimates in a few minutes. So you can leverage the work that all of these entities have done, thank you very much, so that you don't have to input all of your own data. But there is an option to customize the numbers if you do want to do so. So if you have some additional information, we'll show you how to plug that in as well. And if you do decide to go the RFP or the bid route, we would love to invite you to continue contributing to this project and submit that data back to NCPP. So we'll show you how to contribute there through the calculator as well. All right, so let me actually just jump in and do a demo. Let me show you how it works. So this is what the calculator looks like. And on the left side is where you input, as you input information, and the right shows the costs outputs. So let's just say we're working on a purchase for office furniture. I'm going to go ahead and type that in. And then we're going to give the calculator some information about the purchase itself. So the biggest variable here is staff time. And the more complicated the purchase, the higher the costs of running a new solicitation. So I need to select first what type of purchase this is. And office furniture is commodities, so I'm going to input that. And then, again, we know sometimes we don't always have a sense of budget, but we oftentimes know a rough ballpark. I'm going to say my budget, I expect to spend about $200,000 on this purchase. And let's say I'm coming from a smaller entity, and this is something that I'm going to need to get approval for. I can indicate that here with a toggle, and you can see that on the right, we see the estimates for the solicitation and the piggyback costs, and they're broken out into the cost of the item itself and the cost of staff time. And so for this particular purchase, you can see we'll be saving ourselves approximately $15K in staff costs by going that piggybacking route. Okay, there are a couple optional fields here as well. So to get to these numbers, we're taking staff time and salaries from data from the RFP Tracking Project. So again, the data that was submitted by tracking these individual projects across almost 40 agencies. But maybe I think my team is more efficient in putting together a new solicitation. And so I can adjust these staff time numbers down or up if I think I'm maybe going to be less efficient than, Chip or someone else. And I'll see the numbers on the right change as well. We've also built in a section for discounts and markups. So we can choose to set markup or discounts that we think we'd get if we went the solicitation route or the cooperative route. So let's say we might get a 3% discount by piggybacking. And again, note, piggybacking does not always mean that you'll get a better price if you're, a large entity with significant buying power. For example, maybe you could command significant discount through this solicitation path too. So again, this is where you can kind of toggle and personalize your pricing assumptions. And then finally, we have a section for staff salary rates that you can use to adjust salaries for your entity. So again, here, we're using data from the report from across those 40 entities and just salary data. But if you want to input a specific salary, say you actually know the salaries of the folks on your team who will be managing the project and want to input those there, you can do so, and it will adjust these assumptions. So I want to now save this data, and I'm going to click the Save button, and I can save that as a PDF. So basically, that's how the cost to procure calculator works. As you can see, it's pretty simple, and you now can access this calculator for free through the link here. And just note that if you're using it for the first time, you will be asked to input your email so that we can save the data to share with you if you request it in the future. And we can also help you track cost savings over time for your entire team or entity. So we have actually already been in touch with a public entity that regularly uses Pavilion and wants to be able to track every time their team leverages a piggyback contract, their total cost savings over time. So we can basically connect those experiences for you and help you track those administrative cost savings over time if you do end up going the piggybacking or the cooperative path route. So
if you don't mind me adding one thing, just putting back on my old procurement hat, one of the things I loved about this, and when they first rolled it out and said, Tammy, go try some things. And so I was putting in fire engine and, architectural services. I was trying to trick it and see what I could pull up on. And it was amazing that I quickly had the two different scenarios come up. If you go the cooperative route, it's this much. If you go the bid route, it's this much. But at least you know what it's going to be. And the final thing I liked, you can actually print that out. You can print that report out. So when you get to your city council meeting or board meeting and they say, why didn't we go out to bid for this? I can quickly pull up that little scenario and say, by going the cooperative route, we saved this much money. Here you go. And that takes care of that conversation right away. So that was something I was really excited about, Marielle, and I appreciate your team pulling this together.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Tammy. I think the other thing I want to call out is we've been talking a lot, and I know many of the folks on the call are coming from the public procurement side, but we also have some folks from the supplier community on the call today. And I know there's been a lot of interest and kind of conversation around, man, it also costs suppliers money to participate in these different processes. How might we benefit or use, the results of the RFP tracking project and this cost calculator? So I did want to offer that I think the main value here, and invite others, our other panelists to chime in if you have perspective as well. But my sense is suppliers can really use this to build trust with public procurement teams and acknowledge, that, hey, we're part of this broader conversation about how the public procurement community is driving sort of, new conversations forward. And so just being plugged into this conversation, knowing that it's happening, offering the RFP tracking project as a resource and the cost calculator as a resource to teams that you work with, again, can just help build the relationship and show, hey, we're a partner on the supplier community to public procurement. We're following along with trends and innovation in your field, and we're excited about that. I think please, please, please do not send this calculator to public procurement and say, you should go this route. Look at all the money you'd be saving. I think, as Tammy said before, public procurement really is in the driver's seat, and there are a handful of other factors that, of course, have to go into consideration of whether or not it's appropriate to leverage a cooperative or a piggyback contract versus go out to bid. That being said, if you do have a champion who wants to go the cooperative route, you can use this calculator to work with them together to justify the purchase pathway. So if they're saying, oh man, like I really like to go this path, I just need to figure out how to make a stronger case. Again, making them aware of this as a resource and actually being able to quantify some of those cost savings might be something to work with your champion or your partner on if there's an invitation to do so. So just want to call that out because again, I know suppliers also have their own costs and are working to quantify them, but have also asked us, hey, how can we be part of this conversation? Like, how do we share this with our public procurement customers and partners? So, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully this is a step forward in helping our teams on the public procurement side spend time on what's most important and deliver a more strategic, overall function. And if you have questions about Pavilion or NCPP, just wanted to share our emails here. And we're going to have some time, a couple of minutes for questions, and want to open it up. But before we do that, I just want to make sure we get your feedback on today's webinar. So in the chat, we're going to drop a link to a Google form that will take you no more than 30 seconds to fill out, but we'd really love to hear what you think about today's webinar. And there's an open field text in case you have feedback on how we can improve or additional topics that you'd really like us to cover in upcoming sessions as well. So certainly invite you to do that. And with that, I wanna turn it over and open it up to questions. And we have a bunch that have come in from folks. So let's see. Let's see.
I've answered a few online. A couple of people asked about the slides and the recording. Yes, everyone will get those. Even if someone signed up, wasn't able to attend live, they will still get a copy as well.
Yeah.
There was one question, and this kind of outside the scope of this, but Pavilion has a filter option to search for single awarded contracts too. So you get a big thank you from New York on that one, because I know that's
we love that.
And then Tim thanked you for addressing the discount option. We normally see discounts based on cooperative procurement volume. So they liked that. He liked that feature that was added. Kristen is asking, what is the 88% in the calculator representing?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where that 88% is coming from. So let's go ahead and take a look.
And then
okay.
And then just to piggyback and pun intended, can the calculator be adjusted by state? And I'm assuming that could be, you could change like the salaries, because so for instance, like if Florida salaries are different than Illinois salaries, you could adjust the salaries.
Yeah, that's right. So I think taking into account sort of wherever you're coming from and recognizing that salaries might be quite different. Again, there's a national baseline that's been collected by these 40 different entities, but with cost of living differences and others, the way to do that for now is to plug in your own salary data. We have, if there's again a lot of interest in this in the future, I think we have thought about pulling like census data and cost of living data and being able to adjust from there as well. So I think this is our first shot and excited to get some of your feedback there as well. Yeah, and it looked like there was also some confusion around complex projects versus not, and just kind of the math there. Tammy, I don't know if you have or want to revisit some of the findings in the report around, we got a question around a complex project. Looks like it took an average of almost 140 hours to complete. But then the costs per hour, I think this might maybe just be off a zero or like a decimal point.
So the 17,419, that is taking that 138.7 hours. Then how many of them were the procurement lead? How many of them were procurement manager? How many of them were subchecker? So it could be like 10 hours for procurement lead. It could be 12 hours for your procurement manager. And then each one of those was multiplied by the salary ranges that you'll find in the report to come up with the 17. So we don't take 138 hours, multiply it by 17,000. That's not how that works. And yes, it was very tedious. So I'm so glad that Pavilion has now automated all of this because we were doing a lot of this by hand.
We got a question around, how do you know the contract price is better than what we'll get through an RFP? So I think this is like, hey, if you did want to work in any discounting or anticipation of discounts, how or when would you do that? I don't know if anyone on the public procurement side wants to take that or address that. Or Tammy.
No.
With
Go ahead, Chip.
The decision to go out to bid rather than a contract buy. Often you find out when you go out for bid, there's other factors behind that you can use. And I always like to bid whenever possible. If I've got a time crunch or it's a supplier I know I'm going to use, I will use a cooperative with that. But I think I can get better information on a bid. And if I get a bid, I can always go back to the cooperative purchasing agreement if I don't like it.
And here's my point of view. Time is valuable. In fact, time is the new gold standard. Nobody has enough time. So I would be told, well, if we go out to bid, we could save $2,000 on that item. Well, yeah, we could save $2,000, but I just spent how many hours of my time saving $2,000? So sometimes or I have an office supply contract that I negotiated, but I've got the executive assistant saying, but they're having a 2-for-1 sale on paper. If I just run down to the local store, I can get a better deal. And it's like, yeah, but now you want your mileage reimbursed. And I just paid your personnel time of an hour and a half to drive there and get back to work. So I don't think we're saving any money. So time is the big element here versus the cost of the actual product. I'm hoping that's the message that we shared today.
Great. Well, I think speaking of time, we're right at time for this conversation. But thank you all so much for joining. Tammy for spearheading with NCPP this work. Chip, Alejandro, Bruce Robert for joining us and sharing about how your entity participated and really kind of doing the work so that so many more folks can kind of benefit from that baseline. So we're looking forward to future revs of this and iterations and putting it into practice now. And thank you all for joining this conversation and looking forward to the next one.
Everyone, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.